In the mid-2000s, I had what was, at the time, the best meal of my life. It cost more than $800 for 2 people, and fortunately for me, Microsoft paid for it. This is the story of my first dinner at the French Laundry.
The French Laundry is the setting, but the story really begins with anticipation. The author had admired restaurants like this from a distance without ever eating anywhere remotely on this level. He knew the reputation. He did not yet know what people meant when they called dinner an experience.
The first surprise is that this world-famous restaurant looks like somebody's very nice old house in Yountville. The stone building began as a saloon in the 1890s. In 1920 it became a French steam laundry, which is how the name survived.
Don and Sally Schmidt turned it into a restaurant in 1978, with Sally helping define the seasonal, locally grounded cooking that became California cuisine. Thomas Keller spent 19 months raising about $1.2 million, bought the restaurant, and reopened it in 1994.
Keller combined exacting French technique with American ingredients and a deeply considered idea of hospitality. The French Laundry has held 3 Michelin stars since the Bay Area Guide began in 2006. Keller also became the first American chef to hold 3 stars at 2 restaurants at the same time.
But before any of that mattered, you had to get a table. This was before TOC, before the modern reservation apps, and long before the author imagined a computer might solve the problem. Reservations opened about a month ahead, and everyone seemed to call at once.
I decided to try something slightly ridiculous. I called and asked, "Any chance you have a Friday or Saturday cancellation sometime in the next couple of weeks?" Amazingly, they did. Friday, 5 o'clock, the following weekend. Boom, we were in.
Then work exploded. The author was working for Microsoft in the Bay Area, often facing senior executives when something had gone badly wrong. Sometimes because of his team, sometimes because somebody else's problem had become his. That week brought several crises and at least one all-nighter.
There are weeks when working in technology is incredibly exciting, and there are weeks when you discover just how many senior executives know your phone number. On Thursday, my boss Mark told me his boss had heard about our Napa dinner and wanted Microsoft to pay for it as a thank you.
The author checked the offer very carefully. I'm going to the French Laundry. Okay. I'm going to the French Laundry with my wife. Okay. I'm going to the French Laundry with my wife, and we're getting wine. Okay. He decided there was absolutely no reason to ask a 4th time.
My wife and I turned it into a Napa weekend. We visited Chateau Montelena and Stag's Leap, drove through wine country, and let the pace of the valley begin to replace the pace of that terrible week. Then Friday afternoon arrived. Yountville, 5 o'clock.
They expected culinary Versailles. Instead, they found stone, timber, flowers, trees, and a quiet courtyard. The restraint was almost disarming. Here was one of the most famous restaurants in America, looking less like a palace than a particularly gracious home.
Then came the architectural reveal, the kitchen visible through a broad expanse of glass. From the garden, you could watch an extraordinarily precise machine working inside. It was the evening's central contradiction, astonishing discipline, presented without a trace of theatrical stiffness.
Upstairs, their little room held only 3 or 4 tables. The author expected perfection. What surprised him was how relaxed everyone seemed. The service was polished but conversational. The staff engaged with the author and my wife as people instead of performing formality at them.
Then I saw the 2 tasting menus and had a new worry. I had finally gotten us into the French Laundry, and there was a non-zero possibility that my wife would not want to eat half of dinner. This could have become a very expensive marital misunderstanding.
Instead, the restaurant adapted. That changed the author's definition of fine dining. Great service was not, "This is the chef's menu, and you will appreciate it." It was, "We want you to have an extraordinary evening." Precision and generosity turned out to be the same idea.
I had 2 competing worries. Maybe it would not actually be that good, or perhaps worse, maybe I would convince myself it was incredible simply because I knew I was sitting in the French Laundry. Then the food began to arrive.
It really was that good. Not in the abstract, and not because a guide had assigned stars. Course after course made the case directly. The meal felt imaginative without becoming a puzzle, and technically perfect without losing the simple pleasure of tasting something delicious.
I cannot honestly reconstruct the full menu now, and pretending otherwise would weaken the story. What stayed with me was a tiny Wagyu beef course. I no longer remember every garnish or sauce. I remember taking one bite and being shocked by how good something could taste.
The photographs in this film come from a return visit in 2022, not that first dinner. They cannot recreate the original menu, but they preserve the same visual language. Minute detail, generous negative space, ingredients treated with almost architectural care, and a menu that reads like a small book.
And the wine? I do not remember the original bottle. At the time, I ordered something, loved it, and that felt like enough. 20 years later, knowing much more about wine, I would probably hand the evening to the sommelier and say, "Build me an experience."
That is one of the pleasures of returning to a great restaurant. The place may be familiar, but the diner has changed. The first time, the author was discovering the scale of the experience. Later, he could follow the wine, ask different questions, and notice a different layer of craft.
By the end, we were completely full. The French Laundry apparently assessed the situation and concluded that what these people clearly required was more food. Sweets arrived, then more sweets, then something else, then cookies for later. I could not eat another molecule, and the restaurant refused to accept the diagnosis.
Finally, the check arrived, more than $800 for two people in the mid-2000s. The author paused, took in the number, and experienced a rare emotion in fine dining. He had seldom been happier to submit an expense report.
We have returned 3 or 4 times. Almost every visit has been fabulous. One was not, and I readily admit that was because I was exhausted after a long day of 4+ winery tastings. A useful note: if your itinerary is that ambitious, schedule the French Laundry the night before the big tasting day, not after it. Otherwise, you may be too tired to fully enjoy the experience.
None of those later meals quite reproduced the first. Maybe the French Laundry was better that night. The author does not think so. He thinks he was different. Years of wondering what a meal like this could be had ended in a single evening of discovery.
I have had extraordinary meals since then. I have learned much more about food and much more about wine. But there is something about the first time someone shows you just how good something can be. That night changed the scale I used to measure every restaurant that followed.
And if your boss ever tells you he will pay for dinner at the French Laundry, with your wife and with wine, do not ask a fourth time.